The problem I see for a lot of us is we've imitated finances from those who have become wealthy. Instead, we need to imitate our finances to be like Jesus. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute you sell everything and travel around with 12 guys, okay? But I am saying that we need to continue to look at our finances and see if we're acting as Jesus would act. The parables. And one of the things you've got to remember about the parables is Jesus was teaching, and for those who really wanted to follow Jesus, they had a message for them. It was made to reveal, and the parables were also made to conceal. So if you were a true follower, you were somebody that was really anxious to do what God wanted you to do, the parables were a way for Jesus to reveal truths to you. However, if you were not a true follower, he was giving you a way to, or he was using the parables as a way to conceal the truth. And probably the most difficult parable in my mind for us to understand is the parable tonight. And the reason why I think it's difficult to understand, you will understand when you read it. But the first thing I want you to know about Jesus' teaching, that 1 out of every 6 verses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, 1 out of 6 has to do with money. 1 out of 6. Now, the reason why I say that to you is because I've been preaching for some time now, and I cannot tell you the number of times that I've preached about money and somebody's had the comment along the lines of, you really shouldn't preach about money. It makes us uncomfortable. And I got to tell you, every time I look into the scriptures about money, it makes me uncomfortable. And this passage tonight is probably going to make you uncomfortable. And if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, I'm sorry, your heart has gotten hard. Linda, you can come on down here if you want. You don't have to sit in the back. Okay. Do you want your notes? Okay. Jason will bring them to you. So 1 out of 6 passages in Matthew, Luke, and Mark are about money. So let's look at this parable tonight. I broke the parable down. I want to give you the parable, and then we've got to follow through. Now, the one thing you need to remember about this is Jesus is teaching to his disciples, but he also knows the Pharisees are listening. Okay? So you've got to have the framework of the parable to understand the parable. A lot of times when you read this, you think, well, he's just talking to his disciples. No, he's talking to the Pharisees and his disciples, and he's actually placing judgment on the Pharisees through this parable. Okay? That's the background. Let's get into the parable. Monty, would you like to read that parable tonight, verses 1 through 9?
Okay. All right. I'm not hearing audio, please. Are we on?
Are we on? Is it green? Is the green light on?
Are we on?
There you're on.
We're on.
Okay.
Okay, it is Luke 16, you said, 1 through
9.
He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down and quickly write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in their dealing with their own generation than the sons of light.'"
Verse 9.
And verse 9, "And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings."
All right, Monty, I got a question for you. What version are you using?
I'm using the English
Standard?
Yeah.
English Standard. Okay.
So I messed up your class.
No, you didn't mess up my class, but those of us who are reading along with us were thinking, Monty can't read, because that's not what it says on the paper here. But that's okay, because Monty's just using a different translation. It's a good translation, but I will say this, it does not have the accounting correct. It was 900, drop it down to 450, and then it was 1,000, and make it 800. You can see that in the text that's on your page that I gave you. What is it about this parable that you like? Anybody?
I like the fact that I didn't have to pay the whole debt.
You like the fact that they didn't have to pay the whole debt?
Yeah, they cut it down there and said, "Well, we won't make you pay everything back. We'll give you a break."
Can I borrow some money from you then?
Well, I've never known a man who was in that business that did that. So.
I didn't either. I don't know either. But it wasn't his money, right?
Easy to say, right?
So if it was your money and Jason took it and lent it to me and then came to me and said, "Neal, cut it in half," how would it make you feel then?
We'd have a problem.
Anybody else? Anybody like anything about this parable? I got to tell you, this is another one of those parables, as Jan says, this is not the Jesus I know. Jesus has been teaching all along about being righteous, about doing the right things, and here he tells a parable about somebody who is crooked and depraved, and then he compliments them for being shrewd. And that puzzles me. Anybody got a comment on that? Anybody want to? Yes, Bill.
Certainly there's nothing in here to suggest that what I'm about to say is what's actually going on. However, I can tell you that in my dabblings in the construction industry, I've seen times when a debt was so bad that the person to whom the debt was owed was happy to get whatever they could out of that and write the rest of it off. We don't know that he was collecting bad debts here. One could surmise that, but he's at least getting something where the master wasn't going to have anything at all.
Okay. But he didn't get anything. I used to collect bad debts. That was one of my jobs when I was in my 20s. I repossessed cars and collected bad debt. I was a bad boy in my 20s. I dealt with some really interesting people in those days. And we would collect from time to time, like Bill says, we'd collect 20 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar for a bad debt. And even today, if you've got a hospital bill, come talk to me. I'll call them, and I bet you I can get your bill paid for 50 cents on the dollar. Because the hospitals can't really come after you for their debt. And they'll figure out a term where you can just pay something instead of paying nothing. But in this case, he didn't get to master anything. He actually threw it away. He threw away what the master owed. Anybody else?
Just like me.
Shaq's reading his Bible. That worries me.
Well, he figured out how to Okay. He figured out how to redeem himself with his debtor, with the people he owed, with people that owed his master. And so, like he said, he wasn't strong enough to dig ditches, and didn't want to beg. So he was smart enough to figure out a way that he would have somewhere to live, food to eat, somewhere to stay when he left.
It was a smart move on his part. That's
Yeah.
the reason why the master said he commended him for being shrewd. But is it the right thing to do? There's nothing about this in my mind in this parable that this guy does which is right or righteous.
He's accused.
He's a what?
He is accused of wasting his master's possessions.
Yeah. That's
That's why he was getting rid of him.
That's the reason why he's getting rid of, and then he does it again.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Yes, over here. Hold on just a second, Ron. Ron's got something to say. You can tell. Smoke's coming out of his ears.
I just picked up on the words, for the people of this world are more shrewd than people of the light. So he was trying to teach maybe the people of the light that you could be aggressive in dealing with money and end up on the right side of things.
Anybody want to go along with that? Is this not a hard parable? I think it's a hard parable because it sounds like Jesus is commending the guy for what he did, but it's so unrighteous. It's so un-Jesus-like. And Jesus is the one telling this parable. Now, at the beginning of the class, I told you two things you needed to know. Number one, Jesus uses parables to conceal and reveal. And the other thing I told you was that Jesus is talking to his disciples, but the Pharisees are listening in. Now, when he gets down to that point down there where it says, the master commended the dishonest manager for he had acted shrewdly. Now look at this next part. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. Now, underline those words because that right there is a condemnation of the Pharisees. And if you don't understand that right there, this thing gets off track. He's actually talking about what the Pharisees would do. The Pharisees had all kinds of tricks to hide their money in order to keep everything looking righteous, but it wasn't. And then it says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into an eternal dwelling. That's the part that's going to his disciples. The other part, he's setting up the Pharisees. You need to understand that in this story, what's going on here. And he goes on in verse 10, he says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. That verse right there is one of the verses that every Christian should know. Because if you're dishonest with a little, you're going to be dishonest with a lot. And a lot of times people who get to be dishonest with finances start out small. There's a lady I know, she worked for a company as an accountant. She went to church. She was a believer. And one week, she told me the story. One week she was short about $100 in paying her bills. And she thought to herself, I'll just take $100 from the company and put it in my checking account and then pay it back. Well, she got her paycheck, and guess what? She was short again. So she took another $100, and it may not have been $100, it may have been $50, I don't remember what it was. But then over the next 3 years, she embezzled thousands of dollars from this company. And nobody noticed until one day an auditor came in to audit the books, and she had to serve time. And she said, I never intended for that to happen. It just was a little bit here, and it got out of hand. And it wasn't like she was going to Hawaii on vacation. It wasn't like she was spending money on a new car. She was just trying to keep her family afloat. But whoever is dishonest with a little will be dishonest with much, and whoever is honest with a little can be trusted with much. So, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Underline that word, those words. If you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Who is the guy in the parable that would be entrusted with worldly wealth? The manager. What are we with what God has given us? We're all managers, right? And look at that passage. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's saying something hard here. If you're not managing your worldly wealth correctly, who could trust you with true riches? If you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And then he goes on to say, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, here's the key to all this. It says, the Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. Now, remember what I was saying. This whole parable was at the Pharisees as well as his disciples. And he said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your heart. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Underline those words. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. And I want you to think of all the things that people value highly. Think about it. What are the things that people value highly? What? Houses? Cars? Good looks? I know it's a curse, Monty. I just have to live with it. Okay? I didn't choose this life. It's just me. Anybody else? Prestige, power. All these things that people desire is detestable in God's sight. Now, I'm going to teach you the rest of the class how to be biblically shrewd from this parable. You need to understand that this parable is to us as well as to the Pharisees. And there's points throughout this parable that you need to get in order to understand finances Jesus' way. And I think a lot of times there's a radio program called Money Wise on Moody Radio in the afternoons. And it is a very good program. I listen to it quite often. They basically counsel people on their finances and things like that. And I think they make some really good biblical points. But the problem I see for a lot of us is we've imitated finances from those who have become wealthy. Instead, we need to imitate our finances to be like Jesus. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute you sell everything and travel around with 12 guys, okay? But I am saying that we need to continue to look at our finances and see if we're acting as Jesus would act. So the first thing that Jesus says in this parable is don't waste it. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. In this part of the story, because there's two parts of the story, Jesus is saying God is the owner and we are the managers. And the very first thing that Jesus says in this parable to us is don't waste your money. How many of y'all have wasted money from time to time? Good. I'm not alone. Don't waste it. Number 2, and this comes from verse 13, don't love it. There are some people who love money above people. There are some people that love money and use people instead of using money and loving people. He says don't love it. In verse 13, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Number 3, don't trust it for your security. I love that phrase in there where the manager says, what shall I do now? I am too old to dig ditches. Has anybody in here ever had that thought? I've thought about it. I thought, well, if the church fires me, what am I going to do with myself? I'm too old to dig ditches. What's that? Too proud to beg? No, I'm coming to your house, Jan, right off the bat. I'm not too proud to beg. No, I'm too old to dig ditches. I'm too old as a preacher. In a preacher, when you hit 50, you get to be too old. Did you know that? Well, I turned 63 yesterday. I'm over the hill. Not yet. I can see the top. The horizon is coming. But that's, what are you going to do? And throughout my life, I've been thinking about all these people that are retiring early. My brother retired, I think, at 61. And I'm like, wow. I couldn't dream of retiring at 61. I don't trust money for my security because I have seen on more than one occasion money fly away. My mom and dad retired the year before the last financial crisis we had in this country, where stocks took a plummet and everything they had saved went in half all of a sudden. But they didn't worry about it. They just prayed about it and cinched that belt a little tighter, and I think Mom made more pinto beans that year. I don't know. But they did all right. Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 5, your money can be gone in a flash as if it had grown wings and flown away like an eagle. I love that verse because what is on all of our money? An eagle. And every time you look at a dollar bill now, you need to see the eagle. Because generally when you have that dollar bill out, it's flying away. Did y'all hear that? She says there's a song that says, I'll fly away. So, all right. Number 4. This is a big one because this is, as a teenager, growing up in a household where we did not have a lot of money. I started cutting grass when I was 12 years old in order to help pay for my clothing. When I was 12, I started buying my own clothes. My brother is about the same height as me, but he weighs twice as much as me. This is in high school. And I was so skinny back then, I think I wore a 28 or 29 in the waist and a 36 in the leg. First of all, you don't find clothing like that. Secondly, when your brother wears a 36, 34, and you get his hand-me-downs, it don't look so good. So at age 12, I started buying my clothes. By age 16, I was paying for every meal we had out for myself. I didn't pay for everybody's, but I paid for myself. And anything I wanted by the time I was 16, I had to get myself. It wasn't because my mom and dad didn't like me. At least that's what they tell me. But it was because we just didn't have a lot of money. And so it was easier for me to pay my own way. So when I was 18 and trying to decide what to do with my life, I wanted to go off to college and I wanted to study finances, because at that time in our economic history, if you were the CFO of any company, you made all the decisions because it was all about the money. And I wanted to work for a Fortune 500 company, and I wanted to have a Mercedes, and I wanted to have a nice home, and I wanted, and I wanted, and I wanted. And then when I started getting, I realized, you know, you buy a new vehicle, and you drive it for a year, and you don't get the same feeling when you get in it anymore. You get a new house, and your friends get a bigger and better house. And you become dissatisfied. And Jesus is saying here, don't expect money or possessions to satisfy. Ecclesiastes 5:10, whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. This is what Solomon is saying after his study of what's going on in the world, that you will never have enough. And I love that, and I forget who said it, but they asked him, when is enough enough? And they said, when I get a little bit more. It was one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time, I believe. John D. Rockefeller, is that who it was? Okay, good memory. I couldn't remember who I thought it was Carnegie, but I couldn't remember. But John D. Rockefeller said, when they asked him how much is enough. Yes, Bob.
When you invest in a company, and say you own 10,000 shares, the stock goes up, you have a nice profit coming, but you never have enough shares. You're just not happy.
Right.
If you got 10,000, he says, wow, if I just had 20, just had 20,000, that wouldn't be enough.
Exactly.
That's just the way it is.
That's exactly right. Yes, Jan.
I find this verse that's on the screen fascinating, because in one of the descriptions of Solomon and his wealth, and Solomon's the one who said this, it said that whatever his eyes desired, he got.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that was anything and everything. And he says this too is meaningless. Luke chapter 12 and verse 15, he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. One of the things that I wanted to get when I was a teenager was he who dies with the most toys wins. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And now I realize that he who dies with the most toys has family members that are getting a dumpster. Because it's all going to turn to trash. We were unloading my in-laws' house, and they had all kinds of possessions, and much of it was good to them but not to anybody else. So we got everything that was good, and we took it to a place to sell, and a consignment shop, and they just took it all in one lump sum and did that. And then we had all of this other stuff. And my brother-in-law said, we're just going to get a dumpster and put it in there. And I said, okay. So we made this big stack in the yard, and he had this guy come over to pick up the shed that was in their backyard, because my brother-in-law wanted it out of the yard when he sold the house, because it was an old shed. It didn't fit the property. So they came in to get the shed, and the guy looks at him. He says, what are you going to do with all that stuff over there? And my brother-in-law said, "Do you want it?" He says, "Yeah." And he loaded up everything we were going to put in the trash and put it in that trailer and hauled it off. Now that was a God thing right there. Not only did we not have to get a dumpster, we didn't even have to load it. But he thought there's got to be something of value in that. And even though it was just trash to us, it was nothing. 5 things that God says about money, and we're going to have to hurry if I'm going to get through all of this. It all belongs to God. There was a rich man who's manager. We are managers. Number 2, God uses money to test me. God is going to use money to test me. Letter A, it shows what I love the most. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moths and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Letter B, it shows what I trust the most. Proverbs 11:28. Trust in your money and down you go, but the godly flourish like leaves in spring. And letter C, it shows if God can trust me. Those are the 3 ways that God tests you with your money. It shows, do you trust God or do you trust your money? And I got to tell you that a lot of times in my life, I trusted my money more than I trusted God. But God showed Nancy and I early in our marriage that He was there to take care of us. I'll never, ever forget the Saturday, or maybe it was a Friday. It was either a Friday or a Saturday. Nancy and I had gone to the grocery store, and we were at that point in our marriage. I was in college. She was working. We didn't have a whole lot of money. And we went to the grocery store, and as we went to the grocery store, I had a calculator. It was a solar power calculator, and we went through the grocery store, and I added up everything we were buying. I'm going to tell you what it was like for me. Y'all probably have never heard of this before, but we went to a discount store, and one of the things they had was a bin with cans with no labels on it. And you would pick up the cans with no labels, and you would shake it trying to figure out what it was. I can't tell you how mad I was when I thought I was getting peaches and I got peas. Getting beef stew and getting dog food. I would have been happy for either back then. But the thing of it was, we were going through and we were actually calculating what we were going to buy. And then we got to the toothpaste. And it was either we were going to give our whole tithe or we were going to get toothpaste. And Nancy and I sat in that store and we discussed it. And Nancy said, well, you know, I've got a box of baking soda. We can make that last until next paycheck. And we both agreed that's what we would do. And Sunday we gave our contribution. And it wasn't a tithe, it was just what we had determined in our hearts. We gave our contribution that Sunday, used up the last of our toothpaste Monday morning. Nancy put the baking soda box on the sink so that we could use that. And that afternoon we got a box in the mail from my father-in-law. And it was about this big, about that wide, and about that deep. And it was full of sample toothpaste. It was the most amazing thing that I have ever experienced in my life when I was that age. I was in awe of what God had done because, see, we were making that decision on Friday or Saturday, and my father-in-law had mailed that. He was a postman, and back then, if you worked for the post office and you had leftover samples, you could keep them. And my father-in-law, a week beforehand, said, you know, I bet Nancy and Neal could use this case of toothpaste, and didn't tell us nothing at all about it. And there it was Monday. And we never had to use baking soda for toothpaste. And I believe with all of my heart, and will continue to believe, it was because I was faithful to God and trusted Him. He could entrust me. All right. Number 3. Money is a tool to be used for God's purposes. It says use worldly wealth. We're all going to have some worldly wealth. And I think for all of us, prayer is the way we decide how to use our worldly wealth. If we are praying over our finances, and I don't know when you do your budgets, but Nancy and I do our budgets every year at the end of the year. I go through what we've paid and where we're going, what's coming up, and but we pray over it. We pray over what we're doing. So use worldly wealth. What did the manager did right? Letter A, he looked ahead. He looked ahead as to see what was coming. The wise man looks ahead, but the fool attempts to fool himself and won't face the facts. So I think it's very good for us to budget. I think it's very good for us to look ahead and see what's coming down the pipeline. Letter B, he made a plan. Proverbs 16 verse 9 said we should make plans counting on God to direct us. Make plans counting on God to direct us. And letter C, he acted quickly. He acted quickly. Look ahead, make a plan, and then act quickly. Number 4, the best use of money is to get people into heaven. The best use of money is to get people into heaven. I've thought about this quite a bit. What is a soul worth? What was that? I heard somebody say something. Oh. What is a soul worth? What? Blood of Christ. I'm talking about financially. What is it worth? It's priceless? Exactly. But what is it worth for me to save a soul? What is it worth? What would I be willing to pay to save a soul? That's the question. And that's something I've struggled with quite a bit, because sometimes I want to use my money to do my thing and do what I want to do, and I don't think God objects to me wanting to go on vacation. I don't think God objects to me, providing for my family or anything like that. But am I using His wealth wisely? And the best use of money is to get people into heaven. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is all gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And I love the fact that he says use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself. He doesn't say use worldly wealth to convince people of the gospel. Because I think the best way for us to win the world over is by becoming friends with people and letting them see our light in our life. Number 5, one day I will give an account. One day I'm going to give an account. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be a manager any longer. So, any questions, comments, thoughts, criticisms? Because I got 3 last points here I want to hit hard, but I want to give you a chance to speak if you've got a question or if you've got a comment. Yes?
I think it's very interesting how the scripture tells us how the Pharisees understood this parable.
That is interesting.
Because they knew right away that he was referring to them.
Yeah. He was referring to them. People of this world. I'm glad you captured that, Kathy, because I think for years I would read this parable and I never captured that he was talking about them until, later on in life. Anybody else? All right, here's my last 3 points, and these are the things you need to ponder when you get home tonight. First of all, death is the beginning of eternity. Death being the end of life is a myth. Death is the beginning of eternity. I taught a teen class once, and I had one of those 100, or maybe it was 200-foot strings, kite string. And I took that kite string and I passed it around the room. And we passed it around once, we passed it around twice. I don't know how many times we passed it around. And I said, look at this string going around the room. And I said, you see that string? That's time. And I took a red marker, and at the very end that I was holding, I marked that. And I said, that is your life. And the rest of the string is eternity. How important is it for us to prepare for eternity? Second thing, the only investments that really count are people. The only investments that really count are people. And if you invest in people, you're investing in the things of heaven that moths won't corrupt and rust won't ruin. Those are the things you need to invest in. Invest in people. And I'm not saying that you have to invest in 1,000 people this week, but you can invest in one. It was one of the best financial decisions or statements I ever heard when I was talking to somebody about investing and about doing that and trying to save money and all that. And I said, but I just don't have the money to save right now. We're spending pretty much living paycheck to paycheck. And the guy said, can you invest $1 a day? And I said, sure. He said, at the end of the month, you'll have 31. And then by the end of the year, you'll have 352. And if you can invest that much money into savings, just $1 a day, then you'll be able to compound it over time. Just $1 a day. So here's what I'm saying to you. If the only investment that really count, then find one person a day to invest in. And it may be that you invest in them, and this is the thing that I do quite often, is just sit and listen. You have no idea how lonely this world is. And there are people in the church that are lonely that need somebody to invest in them. There are people that are out in the world that are working, that are putting on a happy face, that need somebody to invest in them. And what I mean by investing in them, that means that you let them know that you care about them. I keep going back to this. I think I'm going to write a book before I die. The 3 questions. Do you like/love me? Can I trust you? And can you help me? And I've seen that work more and more in Christianity than any other place in my life. And the reason why I give you those 3 questions is because it's not going to be, oh, he loves me, I can trust him, I know he can help me. It doesn't work like that. They have to grow to know that you love or care for them. They have to see you in action over a period of time in order for them to trust you. And then it's a period of time in their life when they call on you because they know that you love them and you can trust them. The only investment that really counts are people. And number 3, or the point number 3, is this life is a resume for eternity. This life is a resume for eternity. You need to remember that. My sweet little adopted daughter over here, Ivana, she's working on her resume right now. And when she was telling me about working on a resume, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I don't have to do that. I wouldn't even know where to begin anymore. But the truth of the matter is all of us are working on our resume, even if you're retired. Questions? Comments? I'm sorry, you're out of time. You can't say anything. Thank you for your attention. I love you. I appreciate you coming tonight. I hope you got something out of the class, and I hope you will go home and be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Love you bunches.